and make a positive impact on the state.
Good evening and welcome to Primetime Lawmakers for April 11, 2011, the 38th legislative day of the 2011 session of the Georgia General Assembly. As you can see, the state Senate continues to work late in the evening as we begin the last week of the session. I'm Scott Slade, and coming up in tonight's program, an expected House vote on the extensive tax overhaul bill is delayed again. A spokesman from House Speaker David Ralston's office says the bill is dead for the session. The Senate considers illegal immigration legislation that will require many employers to check citizenship status of their workers through the federally Verify program. We continue our leadership interview series. Tonight, Buddy Darden is talking to Lieutenant Governor Casey Cagle about the leadership struggle in the Senate. And we'll welcome Buddy Darden, a former state legislator and congressman who is senior counsel to Mckenna Long Aldridge, and Bill Crane, a political analyst with CSI Crane, for legislative analysis and a look ahead at the last week under the Gold Dome. All that and more is coming up tonight on Primetime Lawmakers. But first, our top story this evening: the comprehensive tax overhaul is dead for this session. And Buddy Darden is tracking down other news at the Capitol. The fate of House Bill 388 is leading, so let's get straight to that news this evening. The measure, which went through no fewer than 3 major overhauls in the past 3 weeks, was approved by committee this morning and expected on the House floor by afternoon, but wrangling within and without the Republican Party stopped House Bill 388 in its tracks over concerns about the elimination of exemptions for charitable giving and a possible tax increase for the middle class. This despite Republican leaders announcing Friday that a compromise had been reached. The bill that was retooled as HB 388 included a personal and corporate income tax rate of 4.6%, itemized deductions of up to $30,000 for those with salaries up to $70,000, and a child exemption of $5,000 for the lowest wage earners. On Friday, Senate Rules Chair Don Balfour trumpeted the job creation potential of the tax overhaul.
Income tax rate, there may be a corporate headquarters that's thinking about moving somewhere, and we just moved 23% lower as a rate. I mean, that's fantastic in this time frame, and this can help move corporate headquarters here. This can help move business here. We did the exemption on energy, which is going to help manufacturing. That carpet manufacturer in Dalton, Georgia, could be building their carpets in Georgia, or they could be building them in South Carolina. And if we don't have the energy exemption, and they do, they may do those things in South Carolina and North Georgia. It creates jobs substantially.
Supporters of the measure say they want to eliminate the income tax, replacing it with taxes on goods and services. However, the version of HB 388 that emerged from committee only provided service taxes for car repair, person-to-person auto sales, and telecommunication services. Proponents concede that the measure would have cost the state $128 million in lost tax revenue in its first year and $200 million in the second year. But they say this money would have been made up with increased business productivity. They do not agree with Democrats that the measure would cost middle-income taxpayers. Again, the House failed to consider HB 388 today, and a spokesman for House Speaker David Ralston says the measure is dead for this session. At this hour, the Senate continues its business as they try to get to some sort of consensus on all sorts of remaining issues, including immigration reform. But that broad immigration measure that was slated as the fourth order of business this afternoon has yet to come up for a vote. Opponents of HB 87 were at the Capitol early this morning to ask legislators and the governor to kill the bill. Among them, entrepreneur Ron Reardon, who says growing up on a farm shaped his view that the state should stay out of the immigration debate, no matter which political party is in power.
They believe government is smarter than taxpayers in terms of making decisions. We believe taxpayers are smarter than government. And that's one of the things I'm sure we'll debate Monday. This will actually be a tax cut for middle-income Georgians.
At this time, the Senate has not taken a vote on HB 87, although the measure remains on the calendar. In other news, local control was at the center of debate on 2 education measures that cleared the House today. When SB 79 cleared the Senate, it extended the terms for members of the Savannah Board of Education. The version that passed the House today allows the governor to replace boards of education in systems that get into accreditation trouble. This raised the ire of many members of the Atlanta delegation who disagree with Atlanta Mayor Kasim Reed about allowing the elected board to be replaced by appointed members. The measure also reduces the number of DeKalb County School Board members from 9 to 7, splitting the viewpoints of the DeKalb delegation.
I was raised in a Republican household, and we were totally surrounded by Democrats. And ever since I've been old enough to vote, I voted a straight Republican ticket. And the reason I did that is because the Republican Party represented business, pro-business. And the party understood that if you kill the engine, then the entire train stops. If our lawmakers ignore this truth, if these bills pass, if they become law, then the Georgia engine will stall.
The coalition then delivered 23,000 petitions opposing HB 87 and SB 40 to the offices of the governor, the lieutenant governor, and House Speaker David Ralston.
All right, Wandy Lawson joins us live at the state capitol today. Plenty of things still in flux today, Wandy, except for tax reform. That seems to be gone now, but there's plenty of other things that are still going on here in these final 2.2 days that are left.
That's true, Scott. The Senate, of course, still in session at this hour. Of course, the immigration measure that we just mentioned there, HB 87, not yet up for a vote, although it does still remain on that Senate calendar. Also today, we had the passage of school board legislation. Two measures, in fact, that were actually waged as local control issues passing in the House today. As you mentioned before, SB 79 cleared that Senate as a bill that would have referred to the terms of Savannah school board members as it came over to the House and passed 109 to 62, and of course extending to include the service for DeKalb County School Board. It's in fact reducing the number of school board members from 9 to 7, also allowing the governor to remove from office members of the Atlanta Public School Board. So it kind of split the commissions or the delegations from both DeKalb County as well as Fulton County. We're going to take a look now at a little bit of that debate.
Some things to keep in mind. Number one, this is in conformance with the best practices set out by Senate Bill 84 last year that we all voted for overwhelmingly, or most of us did. Number two, the bill regarding the number of school board members is in conformance with recommendations set out in a study conducted by the Georgia Commission for School Board Excellence to determine the national best practices for school board governance, which specifically found in analyzing board governance around the country that the optimum number of school board members is either 7 members or less.
Why are we not protecting the children that reside in Bullitt County with 8 members and 9,530 students? Why are we not protecting the 24,961 students that reside in Bibb County with 8 members? Why are we not protecting the school systems in Sumter, Clark, Muskogee, Bartow, Polk, the Atlanta City, and Valdosta City with 9 members, and Valdosta serves 7,512.
Well, as you see there, a bit of dissension there among the DeKalb County delegation. That measure, though, SB 79, did go on to pass the House by a vote of 109 to 62. Changes made there in the House do send that back to the Senate. Also today in the House, passage of a measure that would allow for the reduction of school staff based on their ability to meet the criteria of each local system, as opposed to the number of length of their actual service. We're going to take a look now at some of that debate.
I believe that we're assuring that the state dollars that we spend are spent in the best interest of providing an adequate education, which is a requirement by the state constitution.
But will you yield for a further question?
Yes, I will.
Is it not the responsibility of local boards of education, isn't it their ultimate duty to make sure that the students in their district receive the proper education?
I think it's a partnership between the state and the local boards, as well as parents and the students themselves. And it's very important that we make sure when there is a reduction in force that something other than simply length of service is the primary determining factor. We know, furthermore, that an ineffective teacher generates only half the learning that an effective teacher does, and this simply assures that the best teachers, when there is a reduction in force, that the local school board can determine that based on performance, not length of service.
And so SB 184 did go on to pass the House today by a vote of 141 to 1. Over on the Senate side, there was debate today about reducing the period of time during which early voting can take place, down from 45 days to 16. We had both those who favored the bill saying that it was going to, in fact, reduce the amount that local counties and cities have to spend on voting, and those who say it actually disenfranchises voters.
Some things to keep in mind. Number one, this is in conformance with the best practices set out by Senate Bill 84 last year that we all voted for overwhelmingly, or most of us did. Number two, the bill regarding the number of school board members is in conformance with recommendations set out in a study conducted by the Georgia Commission for School Board Excellence.
Of course, I'm sorry, that was the wrong piece of video there as the debate was going on about whether or not to allow local systems to fire or retain teachers. We also want to take you now, though, to that debate. It has to do with whether or not to reduce the voting length of time from the 45-day period down to the 16-day period. Debate in the Senate today, very, very vibrant regarding whether or not HB 92 would be a good measure. Here is Senator Jim Butterworth presenting HB 92.
Counties must currently begin early voting at least 45 days prior to the election day. Some actually begin their early voting earlier than that, which actually can end up causing some confusion for voters. The first thing that I do need to point out is that this bill absolutely would not address absentee voting in any way whatsoever. This is simply for in-person voting. That's what this bill addresses. Secondly, two recent data points show that the vast majority of voters who cast their ballots during early voting do so in the final 3 weeks preceding Election Day.
Opponents of HB 92 argue that a portion of the 17 to 22% of voters who cast their ballots in the early part of the 45-day window will be lost. The measure, they say, has less to do with saving local governments money than about winning elections.
I think it's about 2012 elections and the people who are going to be on the ballot and the people who would be most constrained by this kind of bill. That is to say, the people who vote, who are most likely not to vote because of this, not able to vote early, are going to be minority voters, senior citizens, and the poor.
And HB 92 did go on to pass the Senate today, 34-20, marking final passage. That measure heads to the governor's desk for his signature. And then finally today, there was another attempt to bring to House rules the measure that would allow those who live in assisted living communities to remain there even beyond the years where they're currently now transferred to nursing home care. The American Association of Retired Persons has been lobbying very hard for a passage of Senate Bill 178. And again, today in House rules, that matter was discussed.
I brought this bill to you on several occasions, Senate Bill 178, which helps set up assisted living communities in the state of Georgia. It's supported very widely by a number of legislators and people in the hallway, and I would encourage your favorable support of that.
Among the supporters of SB 178, Fred Brown, whose 89-year-old mother currently resides in an assisted living facility, as did his wife's mother.
A year ago this month, my mother-in-law was forced, because of the word ambulatory, into a nursing home. And I think the average stay is 45 days when that happens, and she died on the 46th day. My mother is now facing the same thing, being forced out of the facility. It's a family run. She gets excellent care. They are able to take care of all her needs, and I think that she should be able to die with dignity and in love and age and place where she is now.
SB 178 only applies to assisted living communities with at least 25 residents, and the measure only covers those able to pay for their stay, excluding Medicaid recipients. While previous versions of the bill have been opposed by the nursing home industry, this is not the case this year, according to Kathy Floyd of AARP.
And this year, the nursing homes came to the table. They've agreed to this legislation. There is no opposition currently to this legislation. We just need there to be a vote.
Why isn't the bill moving then?
Well, what you see always in the legislature at this point is horse trading between the two bodies. And unfortunately, this bill is caught up in that. And what we want is to make sure that this bill is at the top of the list to be addressed in the next 3 days.
And we can make that 2 days now, as SB 178 did not come to a vote in the House today, and House Rules did not place it on the calendar for tomorrow. Reporting live from the Capitol, I'm in Wandy Lawson for Primetime Lawmakers.
Okay, thanks very much, Amanda. Have a good evening.
You too, Scott.
And continuing now with our leadership segment, and Wandy sat down with Lieutenant Governor Casey Cagle just after the General Assembly adjourned for spring break last week. They began by discussing House Speaker David Ralston's call for the Senate to end its experiment with transferring the Lieutenant Governor's powers to other Senate leaders.
You know, I think he made a very valid point, and it's an experiment that really is against tradition within the state Senate. You've always had the Lieutenant Governor not only as the presiding officer, but the real leader of the Senate. And the rules changes took some of those powers away, and it really has clogged the process down. And I think the Speaker, was very accurate in his comments that the experiment is not working, and that progress has not been able to be done, and it's affecting the real business of the state of Georgia. And it's an issue that does have to be resolved. We're hopeful that that can get resolved this session, but if not, we'll come back after the session and continue, because it is important that the Senate as an institution has a very strong leader and is able to advance the causes that are important to the citizens of Georgia. Certainly tax reform, along with immigration, the budget, all of those issues. And as a leader of the House, the Speaker can get very frustrated, and I understand that.
You mentioned taxes, and of course everyone is kind of standing by looking at what the progress of HB 387 will be. What do you see as kind of being some of the areas that might move that legislation? And also, do you really see that it's something that has to happen this session?
Well, what I have articulated from the very beginning is that, number one, we need to be about job creation, and tax policy can aid in that process. It's a very important position that we've staked out, along with being revenue neutral. And it needs to be revenue neutral not only for the state of Georgia, but also for the citizens of our state. And the balance here is, how to expand the base and then lower the income tax for the citizens of Georgia, along with creating the economic environment that allows companies to want to expand in Georgia and relocate here in a state as well. The energy exemption for manufacturing is one that's very, very important, and I think has very broad support. Whether or not there can be an agreement that's reached within the last 3 days, is still remains to be seen, but it's not dead. I think that's important. The legislation that was set up allows this process to move forward even into the next session. So if something doesn't get done this session, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's dead for eternity.
Seems like a very challenging issue, though. I mean, you mentioned, for instance, revenue neutrality. So as each of these items is examined, it almost looks like you have to really take a magnifying glass and look at that. You see economists on one side coming up with one number, on the other another. Is it something that perhaps might benefit from the time between the sessions to kind of look at?
It is very complicated. I mean, when we talk about tax reform, it's very broad. And I say broad in the context of you've got the personal income side, and then you have the sales tax. If you look over the next 5 to 10 years, clearly there is an eroding away of the sales tax. More and more individuals are purchasing things off the internet, which is tax exempt, and there needs to be a broadening of the base itself. I think there's broad consensus with that. And I also think that many believe, like I do, that if we can take that offset and put it to help the citizens of Georgia in giving them a reduction on personal income tax, that's a favorable thing. As it stands right now, the Tax Council put forward many, many recommendations, and so this is more of a mini proposal in that process. Time could certainly aid and help to make sure that the numbers are right and the public policy is good for really the long-term viability of our state.
And you mentioned the importance of jobs creation. I know you started the session at Eggs and Issues talking about that, and I'm wondering, as you've looked at this legislative session, do you see some areas that Georgia is starting to stimulate jobs?
Well, I do, and honestly, we are, as a state, we're very, very blessed. I mean, we're the capital of the South, the 9th largest state in the nation, the 3rd fastest growing state. Great assets, the fastest growing port, the busiest airport, Fortune 500 companies, research institutions that are second to none. We have all the intangible values that we need to really create the environment that's important for businesses to locate here. But where we have fallen short is that states around us have really created statutory incentives along with closing dollars that really has bought businesses that we ultimately should have in our state. And so we have been undertaking a process of looking at ways in which we can change our tax policy, but also our incentive package as well. We've got a bill that's moving through the process right now that really doesn't allow communities to compete against each other, but makes Georgia more competitive in the Southeast and in the nation. And so we're very optimistic about that. The governor will be moving forward with really a more overarching plan in ways in which we can create the right incentive package that makes Georgia the most economically viable state in the nation.
You know, those who oppose the immigration reform measures that are going through the General Assembly now are calling those jobs killers, and they also are aligning themselves with the agricultural industry and saying that these bills are actually going to be bad for job growth here in Georgia. What are your impressions of the legislation now?
Well, immigration is a very difficult issue. First of all, I think it's important to note that the federal government has not taken the stance that they need to do. And as a result, it has created huge problems within our state, problems that are costing us significant dollars. And, it's a very delicate balance as we talk about this. I wish that the federal government would take the responsibility that ultimately is theirs to address this issue, but they have not. So it's forced the states to step up to the plate and deal with the public safety concerns that are out there, along with putting more regulations in place to ensure that we're protecting Georgians and the citizens that are here in a legal context. I think all of us believe in a rule of law. There is a right way to come to this country and there's a wrong way to come to this country. And if you've come here wrongly, then that is an unjust act. And so we need to make sure that we have laws here to protect law-abiding citizens, and the legislation that's moving through the process, I think, can create that healthy balance. And as it moves through in the latter days of this session, I think we'll get an immigration bill, and I think it will be fair, and it will also be fair not only to the citizens but to business as well.
All right. Well, Governor Cagle, thanks so much for joining us on Primetime Lawmakers.
Great. Thank you. Good to be with you.
Stay with us. Coming up next, I'll be joined by Buddy Darden and Bill Crane for pointed and pithy analysis of these last hairy days of the General Assembly. Right after this. Welcome back to Primetime Lawmakers. The dwindling days of any legislative session are filled with surprises, and this year has been no exception. Let's talk about some of those surprises. Buddy Darden joined us, a former state legislator and congressman who's senior counsel at Mckenna Long Aldridge, and Bill Crane, political analyst with CSI Crane. It's great to have you guys on this evening.
Great to be back.
Last days are always kind of wild here. Let's talk about the Tax Overhaul Bill. Either one of you surprised that the General Assembly decided to be right rather than quick?
This is their finest hour so far this session. I called my body shop owner this morning and told him what they were about to do to him. Cecil Pickens down at the Concord Body Shop,
Okay.
and he said he's going to have to get another accountant just to keep up with this bill. So I'm pleased that they did the right thing. Let's step back. Georgia is a low-tax state anyway. Let's don't get in a hurry. Let's do the right thing.
I think the original bill showed a lot of great work on the part of the committee that put it together, but I don't think on the House side the leadership was ever fond of the tax reform. There were too many exemptions they wanted that didn't come in. There were too many cuts that were going to, the discussion about raising the sales tax on food going into an election year.
Mm-hmm.
So I always thought it was going to be a challenge piece of legislation, but I was surprised by the loudness of the thud when it hit the
Absolutely.
floor this morning that it's not coming.
It hit hard. And let me tell you what I read in the AJC this week is that we've got hundreds of school teachers coming from Tennessee over to Georgia to teach because we've got a better teaching environment in Georgia than in Tennessee.
$7,000 a year better on average.
Yeah.
Yes, and where there is no income tax in Tennessee, they're coming to Georgia and they have to pay income tax because they earn their income in this state. So this idea of creating jobs, I think, and people coming here because of the tax
I think it
changed,
matters
I don't
more
think that matters
at that
much.
senior executive level and the people that they're trying to attract, the Fortune 500 CEO who says no taxes versus 7%.
I agree.
Not
now,
rank
my
and
law
file.
partners, some of my law partners
Yeah.
who are up in the high brackets, they might say $15,000 or even $30,000 a year,
right.
but not the average guy.
Did legislative tinkering wind up making an extra burden on the middle class, or was this the
I've
stock
seen
bill?
numbers that had it all over.
That's
I've
the
seen-
problem,
Yeah,
isn't it?
and I think that in the final analysis, and credit to Stacey Abrams, the House Minority Leader, there were enough questions raised that stung in conservative and moderate Republicans alike on the House side saying, wait a minute, are these good numbers and what are we doing and why are we rushing to do this? We can do it next year. We can do it in the special session. We have plenty of opportunity to do this later. Why rush it and get it wrong the first time and then have to amend it
Well,
later?
Speaker Ralston was off the bat saying, hey, don't get in a big hurry here. He said that at the beginning of the
He
session.
did. And I want to say this about Stacey Abrams. I was a little critical of her about the First Hope tax situation, but she did, I think, a great job on behalf, not just of the Democrats, but the people of the state of Georgia in stopping what I think would have been a disaster. And this is a great thing. We can look at it again next year, and I believe this is a legislature operating the way it was intended to do.
Just a couple of minutes left. Let's get to a couple other things here. Senate vote on HB 87, illegal immigration reform. Federal appeals court said the freeze stays on in Arizona. Is that going to be a wake-up call for this legislative body, or are they going to move on?
I think they're going to continue to move forward on this topic. I don't think they're going to get a bill signed by this governor.
I agree with Bill. I talked to a leading member of the state Senate this past week while they were on recess, and he says the optimum situation is for us to pass our bill, the House pass its bill, and
the
never
governor
reconcile.
never filed, and either
never say
or it
anything
makes
to
it the
the
governor's desk and he pocket vetoes it and doesn't sign it into law because they can still say they passed the bill.
We'll still get an FY 2012 budget done in time.
Yes.
Oh, yes. Absolutely.
Okay.
That's what the legislature does. And the legislature will always make that happen because if they don't pass the budget in time, they have failed. And failure is not an option.
Yeah, there's too much horse trading going on to have it already done, but yeah, it'll happen.
And finally, Sunday sales. I mean, that's one of the big grassroots buzz issues. Everybody can grasp what that's all about. Is that going to make it onto the floor of the House in time? It's being held hostage in the House Rules Committee, right?
There are a couple things the House really wants. The House gets them, yes.
Okay.
That's trade bait. And so I don't think there's any question that the House will pass it as soon as the Senate comes across for a few of their priorities.
All right.
This is great political theater we're seeing now.
All right. Well, it's going to be fun to watch. Thanks for your analysis as always. And we're going to depend on you for the fabulous 1-hour live Sine Die broadcast on Thursday night, okay?
Live from Atlanta at Sine Die night.
Here we are.
And we'll be here.
All right. Thanks, Scott. Thanks, buddy. Thanks, Bill. Coming up tomorrow on Primetime Lawmakers, we'll continue our leadership interview series with Senate Natural Resources Chair Ross Tollison, plus in-depth analysis on important legislative issues and latest Capitol news tomorrow night at 7. You can see a repeat of this broadcast tomorrow morning at 5:30. Coming up next, the Civil War through the eyes of Georgians. Georgia's Civil War is coming up next on GPB. And that's our broadcast for this 38th Legislative Day of the 2011 session. Thanks to our guests for joining us. From Wandy Lawson and the Primetime Lawmakers team, I'm Scott Slade. See you tomorrow. Have a great night.
Senator Yield.
I yield.
Senator, you feel comfortable enough that the technology is there to stop any abuse that might occur?
I feel comfortable enough that the Board of Pharmacy, who we are leaving to promulgate these rules, will make certain that there are checks and balances in there so that these new systems, as they as they come about, that the Board of Pharmacy will be able to promulgate those rules to adhere to it.
This is a GPB original production.